Operation Barbarossa, the great Nazi push into Russia in 1941, signaled the beginning of a war that was like no other. German objectives had been simple. Hitler believed that by the end of 1942, the British would be ready to counterattack, and with them would come the Americans. If Russia turned, they would be fighting a war on 3 fronts. Barbarossa would secure Eastern Europe and eliminate the threat of the Soviet Union, allowing all German efforts to be directed towards the resurgent Western Allies. And Leningrad was central to that objective.
Why Leningrad? Partly it's symbolic. It's the heart of the Russian Revolution. It's a very powerful way of capturing that great symbol of Soviet Russia. But Leningrad is also a crucial port for the Soviet Navy, and it's also a major industrial center. I think around 11–15% of the Soviet Union's industrial capacity is based in Leningrad.
Employing the blitzkrieg tactics that had been so successful in Western Europe, the Germans swept through Russia, conquering all before them. Such was the speed of Army Group North's advance that by the end of August they had overrun their initial target, the city of Neva, and arrived at the gates of Leningrad. Within days, the city was surrounded, and on the 8th of September, Leningrad, almost entirely cut off from the outside world, was officially under siege. With Stalin determined to hold the city at all costs, he dispatched one of his finest generals, Georgy Zhukov, to galvanize the city's defenses. As winter approached, and despite intense German pressure, the city held. The Germans faced a choice.
What was the German capacity for taking Leningrad? The use of the word taking there is really the clincher. It's fairly clear, I think now, that the German strategy for Leningrad was never to take it. The German strategy for Leningrad was to starve it to extinction.
While a policy of total war was being adopted on both sides, the war in Russia was slowly becoming something different, more ideological than strategic. A shift that was highlighted in a letter from Hitler's office that stated, "The Führer has decided to wipe Leningrad off the face of the earth." The Russian winter in 1941 and 42 remains one of the coldest on record, and relentless German air raids and shelling meant that the 2.5 million people in Leningrad would spend that winter without heat or power, running water or drainage, and with rations at starvation level. By spring, 500,000 would be dead, and those that remained watched helplessly as their comrades perished in a city that was slowly being turned to ruins.
All efforts were made to feed Leningrad to the extent possible by plane, by small gauge railways, but to a large extent from 1941 really until 1944, Leningrad is largely having to live by its own resources.
Supplies continued to dribble in, most notably across the famous Road of Light, a treacherous crossing atop the frozen Lake Ladoga that during winter acted as both a viable supply line and means for civilian evacuation. But perhaps what saved the city's people from total annihilation was a former enemy, the Finns. Occupying an area just 20 kilometers to the city's north, Finnish troops stood firm on restored territory lost to Russia during the Winter War. Having achieved their goals, they remained rather dormant, resolutely refusing German requests to allow them to shell the city from the north or to launch an offensive from Finnish-occupied territory. And as the siege dragged on, the German forces, also exposed to harsh conditions, were weakening under the strain of battle. Finally, on January 14, 1944, having reclaimed Stalingrad and defeated the Germans at Kursk, the Russians launched the Leningrad-Novgorod strategic offensive.
By 1944, when Soviet forces began their relief of the siege, Leningrad had been completely decimated. The city, which was such a beautiful, a Venice of the North, built by Peter the Great, founded in 1703, was reduced to rubble.
Over 800,000 Soviet troops and 500 tanks descended on the German lines around Leningrad, and within just 2 weeks, having suffered 70,000 casualties, the exhausted enemy began to withdraw.
to liberate Leningrad, particularly once people saw what the Second World War meant for civilians under German control, simply, I think, compounded that sense of a just war. This was a war that had to be fought, as has often been observed, to the annihilation of the ideology that made something like the siege of Leningrad possible.
Not only had the German invasion, designed to eliminate Russia as a potential threat, failed, but Hitler's motivation for the invasion, the belief that the British would regroup and attack in 1942, had been proven wrong. It would be 1944